What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers, and welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolve video. Alright, soldiers, in this video, we're going to be talking about a set 11 deck, and I know we are almost in set 12 and set 13, and I'm taking a bit of time to talk about this Dragoncraft deck, which, I will be honest, soldiers, Dragoncraft is not my favorite craft. I absolutely love these cards. I love what Dragoncraft does, even though it's a direct counter to Runecraft in my opinion, but like, I just really have not paid attention to this craft the most, even though, like, this is the most popular craft. I still give it, like, its kudos and everything, but, Dragoncraft personally is not for me. But at the same time, I don't want to fail you, soldiers, in bringing you covering information for these Dragoncraft decks that are coming out. But you, soldiers, voted, and I'm going to be talking about this specific deck that you, soldiers, voted on. Alright, without further ado, let's go ahead and roll into that intro so we can get into this deck. Alright, soldiers, so hope you enjoyed that. So, if you didn't already know, we are going to be talking about Resplendent Pheonix. So, this deck is going to be playing a whole bunch of big drops for essentially not that much. And then for the new card that came out for Seaside Memories, which we'll be including into this video, unlike the other videos, unfortunately, since, they came before Seaside Memories. But Seaside Memories actually has some good support for this deck. Alright, so let's get into the pros and cons of the deck. Alright, so if you already know how I usually do these breakdowns, I always have a hard time doing these pros and cons, but it's in a sense of like these pros and cons are kind of like in or around what the crafts are wanting to do. Like, if we're playing Dragoncraft, of course, we're going to be ramping. It's going to be kind of weird if we're playing a Dragoncraft deck and we're not ramping. So they're kind of more of like a generalization, but I will say, what's more intricate for the decks in these pros and cons. Alright, so first getting into our first pro, so it's going to be ramp. So of course, if we're going to be playing Dragoncraft, we're going to be playing ahead. And if we hit our Dragon Oracle or if we hit our ramp cards when we need to, we can be on a crazy curve and be playing bigger cards a lot faster than our opponent. Which kind of like leads us into our next pro here for boss monsters. So if we're ramping and we're getting, above on curve and everything and we get into overflow, then we're going to be playing boss monsters and our opponent's going to have a little bit of a harder time removing our monsters just because they're going to be a lot bigger on what turn they might be already on. And then next up we have overflow. So best thing about overflow is once you get to those 7 play points, you are just already in the game. So as long as you hit that 7 play point break or blip, you will be able to do everything that your deck needs to do. There's no more requirements and you'll be able to play the game. Alright, and lastly we have options. So I should have honestly put late game options here, but the boss monsters that we do have the choice of running in this deck, we can be very flexible with. So whatever boss monster is your favorite, you can potentially really run it in this deck. So, really think for that when you build your own deck or however you want to craft it to your own potential or anything. But of course, the deck has a max potential, but if you're playing casually or you really want to just build this deck to see how it works, there are a lot of options you can really surprise your opponent with. Alright, then moving on into the cons. So what we don't really like about the deck or what's going to feel like the downfall of the deck. Alright, so we have early game. So I think that is like Dragoncraft's like ultimate underlier. So if you can get under Dragoncraft, they're not really going to be able to play. But, being in set 11 slash, 12, 13, which we're about to be, that's not really as much of an issue as it was in the past. So early game is still our weak point, but we do have lots of tools to really help us survive. Alright, so in this next con, I don't think it's going to change too much for Dragoncraft because I do believe that is really what Dragoncraft is just like not known for, is having a hand size. So if we're going to be ramping, we're essentially just minusing 1 out of hand just to gain more play points, which is good because we are going to be top decking, and whatever we do top deck, we're just going to either just play it from off of the play points that we already have, or from the follower that we play that might play another follower. Alright, then next up we have brick potential. Alright, so here's what's essentially going to happen, and you're not going to have a good time playing this deck. So, turn 1, Dragoncraft really doesn't do anything unless you want to keep 1 play point open for some survivability. And then turn 2, you have to go for Dragon Oracle, because if you don't go for Dragon Oracle, you're going to be behind. And if you're behind, then you're going to be drawing cards that you really don't want to see. And when we have those bigger boss monster cards, that's really kind of when we're going to see them. So there is a huge break potential here in this deck, so do be mindful when playing this deck. Alrighty, and then lastly we have Overflow. So it's kind of hand in hand with break potential, and I know that I already talked about Overflow as a good thing, but Overflow can definitely be a bad thing. So if you are breaking and you don't manage to see your ramp, then you are not going to be in that Overflow state, and you're going to be a little bit behind. And when you're a little bit behind on ramp, you're definitely going to feel it. And most of those cards that say, hey, if you're on Overflow and you have those cards in your hand and you're on turn 6 and you don't have Overflow, you're just like, all right, well, all these play points I'm gonna have to use for either survivability or just for bodies on board. All right, so enough about the pros and cons. Let's talk about our legendary for the deck. All right, soldiers, let's rise from the ashes with Resplendent Pheonix. So she's a 3-cost 3/3. She has ward, but when she comes into play for fanfare, you can spend an extra 2 play points. And if Overflow is active for you, you can shuffle your deck, then put the top card of your deck into your EX area, and it costs 0 to play this turn. But when she dies, you give your leader +2 defense. All right, so essentially what I was talking about in Overflow. So as soon as you play this card, not only is this card only a total of 5 play points to shuffle your deck and get something for free off of the top of your deck after you shuffle, of course. Like, you can play any of those boss monsters we're going to be talking about, or any card realistically from our deck into the EX area, and it's going to be free. And if we play another Resplendent Pheonix, we can do it again, keep going into a huge loop of stuff like that. So building an entire board off of free cards is going to be absolutely amazing. And then I kind of like on the fact that she has the last words with, giving your leader +2 defense, just in case if you're a little bit in the early game, you just really need to play her to have some defense, because she's also a ward as well. Alright, so we're going to be transitioning on what we're going to be talking about for the early game, and I'm just going to warn you, soldiers, please do not run a playset of all these cards in the early game. These are just cards that you need maybe one playset, maybe 2 of after you've run another one of the playsets to really help you out in surviving in the early game. Alright, so looking at our first card, we have Marion the Elegant Dragon Newt. So he's a 1-cost 2/2, so he's essentially a goblin, but if you're an Overflow, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and you can put a Dragoncraft follower from one of them into your EX area and put the rest of the bottom of your deck in any order. Alright, so I think this is just a nice goblin on the field just to go ahead and have your opponent answer your cards, especially if you're going first. You can play this guy on 1, and then sometimes, you can even run Phylene if you want to, since this is also a card that came out in Seaside. But I think Marion is just a pretty good 1-cost 2/2 goblin to answer your opponent's cards, or make your opponent answer you. Alright, and then next up we have Wyvern Guard Bari. So if you are coming from the Vanguard set, I believe this is just a perfect card in the early game, just to snipe the first card that your opponent plays. So I think it's very good in the early game. Alright, and then next up we have Dragon's Nest. So this is a pretty valuable card if you manage to keep it on the field. So this really does kind of help with the problem of Dragoncraft having the, huge hand size thing. If you're able to see maybe 1 or 2 of these, since we're not really, establishing so many cards on board until we get into Overflow, I think this is a nice key piece to look at in the early game. Alright, and lastly, we have Blazing Breath. So I think this is the GOAT card, because this card just transforms into a 4 damage 1-cost, which is absolutely amazing for Dragon, in my opinion. So as long as you're in Overflow, you're going to be able to do 4 damage in quick timing. So that's going to destroy a lot of followers. So I think this is definitely like the go-to card as like the playset that you run in this deck. But if you maybe want to slide in maybe 2 Dragon's Nest or the Wyvern Guard, or even the Marion for example, for those other 2 cards that you might be running just for the early game, just so you can see some consistency in living. All right, so let's talk about the ramp. Alright, so of course we have our GOAT, the classic Dragon Oracle, which is just going to be the amazing 2-cost spell card that allows us to increase our maximum play points by 1. Or if we're in a really good position with our play points and we need to just go ahead and draw a card, we can just do that too with Dragon Oracle. But however, I do want to talk more about the new card that we got from set 11, the Dragon Devouring Dread, which is a 9-cost 8/8. But when it comes into play, for each Dragoncraft card that costs 7 or more in your cemetery, you can select up to 1 enemy fall in the field and banish it. It all has an activate ability. While spending 3 play points to discard this card and a Dragoncraft card that costs 7 or more, you can increase your maximum play points by 1 and draw a card. Alright, so we have some more ramps. So after you go for Dragon Oracle on turn 2, if you manage to have this card and another 7-cost card that is Dragoncraft, of course, you can also increase your maximum play points while also drawing a card. So you're ramping twice, and you'll be in that good space for the next card that we're going to be talking about. Alrighty, and that card is Ayla the Devoted Knight. So she's a 5-cost 2/2. When she comes into play, you can choose one of the two abilities. You can either 1, increase your max play points by 1 and then recover 2 play points, or you can 2, if Overflow is active, where you can summon a Devoted Dragon token and give your leader +2 defense. Alright, so I personally do like this card just because of the multitasking ability that she has. So if we're, on tempo with a whole bunch of ramp and we're not in Overflow yet, which is, what can happen sometimes if you hit Dragon Oracle and then hit Dragon Devouring Dread, it's just really the perfect hand if you have all 3 of these things in your hand, along with like the 7-cost Dragoncraft card, and then having some sort of like survivability once you like maybe draw your next card or something like that. It's only the perfect hand. But I really do like for Ayla the Devoted Knight that she is able to increase your maximum play points by turn 5, which will get you into Overflow by the time you get back into your next turn, while also having the 2 play points, which is going to be very important because we have a card later on that we're going to talk about, which is going to be the perfect card that we want to do on our opponent's turn for 2 play points. Alright, I'm not gonna lie to you soldiers, I thought that this card was going to be later on in the video. I did not actually know that this was going to be in the next one. I made these things and I kind of forgot about them. So Dragonic Call is a very good 2-cost card that we can play on our opponent's turn to get some really good value. Alright, so Dragonic Call, it's a 2-cost quick spell. You can look at the top 5 cards of your deck. From among them, you may reveal up to 2 Dragoncraft cards that cost 7 or more and add them to your hand, and you put the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. Alright, so I really do enjoy this value of this card just because, probably because I'm a Runecraft player and this is really just sorcery cash for dragons. So I'm really glad that they're able to have a card like this. But just being able to draw 2 cards on your opponent's turn, and these cards that are costing 7 or more that we're definitely going to look at have the discard ability like the Dragon Devouring Dread that we just looked at. So being able to get those 7 cost or more cards on our opponent's turn is very important. Alright, so speaking of 7-cost cards or more, let's talk about some removal. Alright, so I don't know if everybody knows about this combo, but Wildfire Tyrannosaur is a perfect card for this deck. Just because this is a 8-cost card and it is 7 or more, and when you discard it, you can get the discard ability off of the card you're already originally discarding with, and then you can trigger the Wildfire Tyrannosaur, which when this card is discarded, you can spend 1 extra play point to select enemy fall on the field and deal it 3 damage. So I think that combo is very important. I don't see everybody running it, but I think it's a combo that everybody should be running. Alright, then next up we have the new card from set 11, so we have Thunderous Roar. So it's a 2-cost quick spell. So as an additional cost to play this card, you can discard a Dragoncraft card that costs 7 or more, and then we can select the enemy fall on the field and then deal it 3 damage, and if the additional cost was paid, we can deal 4 damage to it instead, and then draw a card. So the thing that I'm liking about these abilities, or for these newer cards when having the extra cost, is that we're actually able to retain the value, because we are getting rid of the 7-cost or more Dragoncraft card, but we're also replacing it by drawing a card from our deck. Alright, and then next up we have another new card, which is going to be typically the 7-cost card that we are going to be pitching unless we're in Overflow and then we want to play this card naturally. So we have Azure Flame Dragon Newt, which is a 7-cost 6/6. You can evolve for 1, but when it comes to play, you can select enemy fall on the field and then deal it 6 damage. But you can also activate by spending 1 play point to discard this card and a Dragoncraft card that costs 7 or more to select enemy fall on the field and then deal it 4 damage. So like I said, this is pretty good in the early game, so if you're drawing cards like this and then you have Wildfire Tyrannosaur, so around like turn 3, if you haven't like ramped or anything and you're really behind, you can really do a lot of damage to your opponent by getting rid of Azure Flame and then getting rid of Wildfire Tyrannosaur, so you can deal 4 damage to another follower and then 3 damage to another. Alright, and then looking at the Azure Flame Dragon Newt Evolve, so on Evolve you select enemy fall on the field and then deal it 6 damage. So the thing about Azure Flame that I really do like is that, naturally in Overflow, we're going to be just nuking opponent's cards, because at that point, those followers are going to be around 5/5, maybe even 6/6. And then if they're even bigger than that, because you do have to realize if we're playing naturally like we should be, we're on curve. And by the time we hit our turn 7, if we want to play cards like this, like, they'll be on their turns 5 and they'll have trouble getting rid of a 6/6, while we naturally just have the 1 card that's just going to deal 6 to a follower. Alright, so let's talk about the synergy cards for the deck. Alright, so when playing Resplendent Pheonix, we're going to look at cards that we can play for free and then just get a lot of value out of them. So these are the 3 cards that I do believe you should be just naturally running, or, maybe slide in just 1. And I'm looking at Jabberwock or, Genesis Dragon when I'm thinking of this. Because, these cards don't really have any other effects like the other 7-cost followers that we're looking at that pitch. These are cards that are just dead in the water. You have to wait until turn 7, 8, or 9, or, if you manage to hit them off of Resplendent Pheonix to really play them. So these are the kind of the cards that you need to like secondarily focus on. Also, yes, getting into the meat and bones of the deck. All right, so Jabberwock. If you manage to hit Jabberwock off of Resplendent Phoenix's ability, you're able to get rid of Resplendent Phoenix. You get your last words to heal too, which is pretty cool in that combo, in my opinion. But you get to keep revealing the top card of your deck until you hit a follower that costs more. There's not that many followers that you should be running that are 2-less in this deck. And once you get into that overflow state, which is realistically the only time you're able to do Resplendent Phoenix's fanfare, there are a lot of followers that you can hit that just have huge value. Alrighty, next up we have Earned Justice. So this card is actually pretty good just because it loops its own value. So as long as you put the top card in your deck, and most, like I would say, like, I don't want to give like a natural percentage, but I'd say like honestly 75% of your deck is followers that are 5 cost or more, just because we're going to be stacking our deck with a whole bunch of big cost followers because we want to hit Resplendent Phoenix on some big followers. So as long as it's 5 or more in the EX area, we can either put this card back into our hand to either heal 8, which is very important just so you can just heal a whole bunch of like health back, or you can just go ahead and evolve this follower into a big storm follower. And then lastly, I know Chris is going to enjoy this card, so you're actually able to play Genesis Dragon in this deck. And, spamming out Genesis Dragon, like, unless you have hard removal, you're taking 10 damage. Unless you have the hard removal and quick timing, which, of course, the smart and the controllable Dragoncraft player will know. I know this is going to get removed, but I didn't pay 9 for this card, so if you remove it, I'm not really losing out on a lot of value. Alright, soldiers, so when doing my research for the deck, I was looking up what Resplendent Phoenix was. And looking up on the Japanese deck list and everything, I'm seeing that this deck was originally called Lindworm because this was the late game card for the deck. So essentially, you can play Resplendent Phoenix, you're only spending 5 of your 7 play points in Overflow, of course. And then if you have those 5 Dragoncraft spells in your cemetery, you're able to recover the 5 play points, or if you're even in bigger play points, since we're ramping, and of course I don't think we're going to lose the game by turn 7 unless you break. You'll be able to recover those play points and then being able to evolve this follower. Alright, so of course I kind of already talked about what Lindworm naturally does, but having just a 10/10 follower that you kind of like played essentially for free, and then evolving this follower into these dangerous cards, either the Virtuous or the Inquitus, is just very dangerous for your opponent, and you got so much value for so little play points. Alright, so looking at the Virtuous Lindworm, so it has Ward, and at the start of your end phase, you can give your leader +6 defense, and then you can draw 3 cards. Alright, so big on the drawing cards thing, just because I'm a huge control player, but being able to replenish your hand like that is absolutely amazing. While on top of healing 6, and of course in Run Overflow, there is a chance that this card is just going to get hard removed, and then, your opponent could swing at you for 6 damage afterwards, since, that's kind of how fast Shadowverse Evolved is kind of moving right now. But just being able to have the 10/10 ward threat, which, not every deck has the answer to, and of course, if we're in Overflow, maybe our opponent bricked, there's situations like that. So having a 10/10 with ward while also healing 6 and then drawing 3 at the end of your turn is just absolutely amazing value. Alright, and the other thing that I really do like about this card is that it just has late game value or just game closing value too. So you can also spawn out a 10/10 Storm that also ignores ward. Alright, so I really do personally like this card in this deck, just because, if you draw it before you hit the Resplendent Phoenix or anything, then, you're definitely going to be pitching it off of the discard abilities off of your other cards that you're going to be looking at. And if you hit it on Resplendent Phoenix, then it's just huge value, because whatever position in the game you are, you can threaten 10 damage, you can play on the back end, draw 3 cards, or heal for 6. I just really like what this card does for the deck. Alright, so let's talk about some extra value for the deck, just in case you might either be on the back end, or if you really want to just attain some value on your opponent's turn, or just something that's amazingly huge that your opponent might have a hard time recovering from. Alrighty, so we're looking at Pumpkin Dragon, so he's a 8 cost 6/6, he has Ward, and when he comes into play you can give your leader +5 defense and while also drawing 2 cards, but he does have a nice discard ability for this deck, so you can activate for 2 play points to discard this card, and a Dragoncraft card that costs 7 or more, you can give leader +5 defense. So like, this is some good recovery if your opponent is definitely beating you down, just being able to get rid of this card and then another 7 or more Dragoncraft card that you might not need to go ahead and heal 5. But the downside of that is that, if you're going to be healing 5, you're not going to be drawing a card, you're just replenishing all your value in terms of life. But in naturally playing this card off of Resplendent Phoenix, I think this is pretty alright too, just because you get 2 wards, one of them's bigger than the other, of course. It heals you for 5, draws you 2 cards, and then if they answer the Resplendent Phoenix, you're also going to be healing 2 as well. Alright, Soldier, so I might be a bit of an old head when talking about this next card, but it's really, honestly, a very good card for Dragon. So we have Serpent's Wrath. This is a 3-cost quick spell. It deals 5 damage and quick timing. There's not that many cards that deal 5 and quick timing for Shadowverse Evolve for every single craft, but this having the natural deal 5 and quick timing, and then if we're in overflow, so if we're actually playing the game, we get to draw a card. So plussing in value and hand size and removing our opponent's card is just very good. Alright, and next up we have Sharon Seaside Nymph. So I do want to apologize that I didn't include any of the other Seaside Memory cards for the other decks, but as of coming out, Seaside Memories is out, and this is a card you can be running in this deck. But Sharon Seaside Nymph, she's a 7-cost 3/3. When she comes into play, you can recover 5 play points. You can also engage to choose up to 2 abilities. You can either 1, select enemy follow in the field, and it can't attack enemies during its controller's next turn. Or 2, the next time one or more followers are put onto your field this turn, you can give 1+1/+1. Or 3, you can give your leader +2 defense, or 4, you can draw a card. Alright, so a lot of what this card can do, and mind you that you do recover 5 play points when playing this card, so if you go for Resplendent Pheonix and then you play this card, you recover all the play points that you did for Resplendent Pheonix. So my gosh, oh golly, if you manage to hit another Resplendent Pheonix after that, then you're building an entire board. Mind you, you do have to engage for Sharon Seaside Nymph before you do things, and if you manage to draw that card, and then you hit Resplendent Pheonix, oh yeah, you're riding a super card high there. And I'm not gonna lie to you, soldiers, this card is just really good. So not only do you get to naturally play it, and then it's just a 2-cost realistically, we're able to choose 2 of the abilities of the 4 that we can choose from, and if we manage to play it off of Resplendent Pheonix, we're just doing so much. Alright, soldiers, so let's get into the tech for the deck. Alright, so the thing about the tech that I really wanted to talk about here is that these aren't alternative routes. These are just cards that you're able to play to help for removal, because there's that weird period in the mid game where we do need to kind of answer our opponent's cards. So I think these are a lot of cards that we can really think about in terms of like removal or helping us in or what our deck might be lacking. Alright, so looking at our first card, so we have Demonic Dragon Mage. So this is a 3-cost quick spell that deals 6 damage to a follower on the field. 6 damage to a follower on the field in quick timing. Yes, you heard me. So this card came out during Vanguard, and like I said, it's kind of very different from Serpent's Wrath, but we are getting into an age where followers are going to be very big, and sometimes they get as big as 6. And spending only 3 play points to deal 6 damage to something in quick timing, yes, we might -1 here, but being able to just hard remove something with 6 damage is very good. Alright, then next up we have Paradise Vanguard. I think this is just the neutral card that is just really good. So if you're playing against Earthright and you want to get rid of your opponent's Riley, if they're playing it in terms of like really good tempo and they're really smart, this isn't going to be a very good card. But this does deny so many last words for many cards, so running Paradise Vanguard isn't a bad option. Alright, and then we have Roy Dragon Cleaver. So if you're having a hard time ramping and you're not seeing anything, or you just really don't have the best luck, this isn't a bad card to slide maybe 1 or 2 max, just so you can go ahead and get the Dragon's Oracle so you can start ramping and then get into Overflow. Now mind you, if you do run the Evolve, which you honestly should include at least like 1 Evolve, then running it into another follower, as this follower does turn into a 3/3, is very vital in terms of survival. And then there's also that secondary rendition for Roy. If you are, doing very good on play points and you've seen your Dragon Oracles and you do want to go ahead and get Dragonic's Call, then that's not a bad option as well. Alright, and lastly we have Bahamut. So I know you soldiers are probably thinking, yo, this guy is old. He's got Serpent's Wrath and Bahamut as like these cards that you should be running in this deck. Alright, so Bahamut's not really a bad choice, and hear me out. So not only do you get to destroy each follower on the field, if you do manage to evolve this, which you should since this is a free evolve, you can destroy all amulets on the field. And when you destroy all amulets, Wasteland is going to be worrying about amulets on field. So you can take care of that pesky getaway car, you can take care of that pesky train. You don't have to worry about any of that. You can still run this in set 11, and it's actually going to be pretty decent if you run a card like this. Now mind you, this is like a 9-cost card, so you need to really hit this off of Resplendent Pheonix, so I would say this is kind of like the tech card. So if you want to run it to really answer your opponent's Wasteland deck, maybe slide in 1 or 2 of it. 2 of it max, of course, because if you run a playset, then you have lost it. Alright, so let's get into the grade of the deck, and I feel like I was pretty fair in grading the deck, but of course we're going to look at 2 example builds. One I kind of threw together from some other example builds that I saw from, and the Shadowverse Evolve example one. Alright, so moving into the example deck list that is on the actual website. So we talked about most of these cards. There are 2 cards that I didn't, well, excuse me, 3 I didn't talk about in this video, just because Zelgania of the Great World isn't really attainable for everybody. It's going to be attainable pretty soon, but this is just the neutral card that everybody is running. So I kind of want to be very different in my example build and kind of leave it terms for like budget, because that is more of a competitive build. And I know in the previous video, someone had asked me, you know, how can we upgrade from a lower like budget build to an upgraded build? And of course, in this deck, we will talk about the cards that we can remove. But yeah, all over, I would say this is a pretty decent build. So if this is something from the cards that you already have and you want to like transition over into like maybe Dragoncraft after coming from another craft, this is just a good example build for all the cards that you might need for this deck. Alright, so here is the deck list that I crafted up together. So this is just an example deck list. So I think the only hard card you would have a problem getting is probably the Blazing Breath, since this is just like the GOAT natural card that you need for Dragoncraft. This is the card that you need for early game, in my opinion, so it's either this or bust. Like, I think this is the best 1-cost card for Dragoncraft and Quick Spell. If anyone disagrees with me in that, you know, let me know in the comments below. I will definitely, like, we can talk about it, because I've been Blazing Breath so many times in the past, and I might just have like a little bit of like unk trauma here, but I think Blazing Breath is just the perfect card to be running in the early game. And then of course we have our 2-cost cards, which are going to be helping us remove. I think the big thing about this deck is we need to survive until we can get into Overflow, and then on top of also ramping too. So there's like, you know, you got to either have the cake and, you know, either get the cake and you can't eat it too, you know, it's one of those things. But I really do think that this deck really does cover its ends with Dragonic Call, just so we're able to get those 7 or cost more followers that are either the, you know, the Devouring Dread, or we can get the Wildfire Tyrannosaur to help in some terms of some early removal. So I really do like it's able to get those 7 cost or more cards. But yeah, I'm sorry if I sounded like I, you know, just rambled into gibberish here. So I will be putting the deck code in the description below, as we usually do. So if you have any counter to the builds or something that we can really improve this on, let me know. I'm not a huge Dragoncrafter. I'm not here to represent Dragoncraft. Now, Runecraft, on the other hand, you know, I'm your guy. But when it comes to Dragoncraft, I'm not a huge person on that, but I do want to give some example deck builds that you soldiers can play around with, and I think this is something that everyone can look towards. Alright, so getting back into the grade of the deck, and I'm not even going to play around, so this is a B+ deck. I think its late game options are absolutely amazing, but I just do think that there's like a huge brick potential. You need to see Resplendent Pheonix to get the max value out of playing all your play points. So as early as turn 7, which, you know, is the perfect turn to go for Resplendent Pheonix, since that's the only really good time to go for Resplendent Pheonix. I keep saying that, but Resplendent Pheonix happens on turn 7. If we've ramped, we can get there very quickly. If we didn't, then we're playing like basic Shadowverse Evolve like everybody else is, and we're not even playing Dragoncraft. So I feel like that's a big like lead down for Dragoncraft. And the other thing about this deck is everyone's really playing Kagero, so if you're comparing this deck to Kagero, you're going to get stormed out just because their followers are so big and they're doing a lot of damage to you before you can really capitalize on, like, you know, hell yeah, I ramped and I didn't take care of my opponent's follower, you know, and they're playing Kagero, of course. I'm taking like 7 damage next turn. So this, you know, this is definitely a good deck to play casually, or if you manage to, you know, beat out Kagero in some way, shape, or form just because you handcrafted your deck to beat it, which I think is a good option too if you want to go against it. This is definitely a B+ deck. And alrighty, soldiers, that is it for the Dragoncraft deck. I actually had a lot more fun than I expected on talking about this deck than I originally thought. I thought this was going to be a little bit of a drag. I'm not a huge Dragoncraft player, like I've already said. I don't even want to represent Dragoncraft in any shape or form, but I do love these cards' art. I do love the card abilities. I just don't enjoy Forte. Forte is something that lives in my brain rent-free. As a Runecraft player, you're playing spells. What do you mean a 7-cost card can swing at me for 7 and it has aura, and I have no way to interact with it? So like, it just still mind boggles me. I know I'm a bit of an old head when, you know, that like Forte was dominating set 2, and I'm just like, yo, I can't do anything against this card. Like, I'm struggling. But you know, we're in different times now. I know I need to grow out. I feel like Captain America coming out of the ice talking about it. But, you know, I'm glad that I was able to get through this, and I'm glad that you soldiers were able to watch all the way through. Alright, soldiers, so some last minute updates. Alright, so there are 2 polls, one in the Discord and then there's one on YouTube. So if you're watching this video as of like right now and you're one of those people that are constantly watching, I want to go ahead, 1, thank you so much for watching. It means a lot to me that you're watching these videos. and then kind of like keeping up with what I'm doing and then keeping up with Shadowverse Evolve. It's very huge. I love this game. I hope you love this game too. But we have two polls. There's one for which craft that we're going to be doing next for the reveals, and then there's the other one that's on YouTube. So the first one I talked about was on Discord. But the YouTube one is going to be the one on how we want to structure these videos, since we are going to be doing a combined set. And, you know, this is the first time we're doing a huge, you know, big two set combination for these reveals. So do you guys separately either want the sets 12 and 13 separately, or you want them all together in one craft into one maybe bigger, longer video so you can maybe skip through it or whatnot? So yeah, please vote in those polls. It would really help me out so I can hone in on what to do. Of course, I'm still gonna cover them regardless. So if you don't want to, feel free to don't do them. You know, you're free to do whatever you do, but it would really help me out if you voted in those polls. But all right, soldiers, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. It means a lot to me that you're watching this content and all the other stuff that's on this channel. I hope you are safe in whatever you do tonight and safe whatever you do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah, TRINN. Just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do. Just to get you away. What I got to do.